Welcome to the latest episode of the Federal's Worldly Wise, a weekly program that attempts to deconstruct important international events that are trending at the moment. A few days ago, the media was abuzz when Pakistan Defense Minister Khwaja Asif told journalists that his country had done dirty work, in quotes, by supporting, training, and funding terrorist organizations for the US and Britain, a mistake for which Pakistan had suffered. This was echoed by former Pakistan Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto, who said Pakistan's involvement in funding and training extremist groups was not a secret. Many in India took this as confirmation of Pakistan's role in sponsoring terrorism and supporting terror groups in the context of Kashmir and the latest Pahalgam killings. While this may be true, there is a larger story in how Pakistan got radicalized due to its relations with the United States. Since independence in 1947, the US had got round to aligning with Pakistan in a relationship that bound Islamabad to Washington, D.C. in a tight, very often stifling embrace. The Pakistani defense minister's candid admission gives the impression that his country had a choice to keep away from involvement with the US. But if that is so, that is far from the truth. Pakistan, since independence, had gradually moved into the US orbit, creating a dependent relationship with Washington that left it with no choice but abide by what the US wanted. During the 1971 war, the nature of their bilateral relationship was made clear when the US backed Pakistan and the Soviet Union supported India. The war ended even as reports came in that the feared US 7th Fleet was arriving in the Indian Ocean in an attempt to tilt the war in favor of Pakistan. But that did not happen as the war came to an end with India winning decisively over Pakistan and helping in creating a breakaway nation, Bangladesh. In end 1979, on Christmas Eve, in a game-changing event, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Pakistan's western neighbor. This was the period of the Cold War. The US did not want the Soviet Union in Afghanistan as that would directly undermine Washington's role in the region. Already, the US had faced a severe setback 10 months earlier in February of 1979 when Iran deposed its favorite ally, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, or the Shah of Iran, in a revolution that brought the Islamists under Ayatollah Khomeini to power. The US overnight lost its hold over Iran. The Jimmy Carter administration and that of Ronald Reagan, who was voted to power in the US a year later, in 1980, did not want to lose Afghanistan too to the Soviet Union. Using the CIA, the US created an axis with Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Afghan rebels, or the Mujahideen, who were opposed to Moscow's occupation of their homeland. Turkey and the United Kingdom too were part of the operation. What the Axis essentially meant was that the US would funnel funds and weaponry to Pakistan through the Saudis. These would be used to train the anti-Soviet Afghan rebels who had arrived in Pakistan and then send them back across the border battle ready to fight the Soviets. The US gave an estimated $32 billion, no less, to Pakistan to help in combating the Soviets in Afghanistan. It was the largest flow of money from the US to Pakistan within a short period of time. Over the next decade, Pakistan's north and western regions adjoining the Afghan border became the nerve center of the Afghan Mujahideen, resistance to Soviet occupation. One key fallout was its profound impact on Pakistan itself, as the number of Afghans in exile in that country numbered at least 2 million or 20 lakhs. Almost all of them were pious Muslims allied to the political form of Islam and wanted to rescue their country from the hands of the godless Soviet communists. In the course of their stay and training in Pakistan, the Afghan refugees willy-nilly influenced the politics and society of their host country. Their time in Pakistan coincides with the rise of Islamism there. Though the previous government of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had proclaimed Pakistan as an Islamic republic under a parliamentary system of governance, it was his successor, Ziaul Haq, who implemented Islamization in the country. During the decade of the 1980s, Pakistan saw a rise in Islamist politics and the marginalization of secular politics. The ISI, which was coordinating the Afghan resistance effort in tandem with the US, became a powerful institution during this period. A section of the hitherto secular Pakistan military, which worked closely with the Afghan Mujahideen, was also heavily influenced by Islamism. Once the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in February 1989, defeated by the US-backed resistance, Pakistan was left with a huge stock of weaponry suitable for guerrilla warfare, lots of funds, and several trained mujahideen, all of whom did not move back to Afghanistan. The ISI, which had developed a close relationship with the trained personnel, turned its attention to Kashmir. That is one reason why the exit of the Soviets from Afghanistan coincides with an upsurge of violence in Kashmir in 1989, which continued for the next decade until after the turn of the century, until 2002 at least. The Kargil War of 1999 was part of the conflagration in the Kashmir Valley. Pakistan's involvement with the US over Afghanistan took its toll internally too. Religious extremism took root within its society, filtering into its military and security apparatus. Ziaul Haq died in an air crash in 1988. This was followed by a period of democracy, only to again fall into the hands of the military under General Pervez Musharraf 11 years later. Overnight, the situation in Pakistan changed after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. The US, which had been directly responsible for the growth of Islamism, including the Mujahideen and its offshoot, the Taliban, wanted Musharraf to rein in the Islamist sections within Pakistan. Musharraf tried, but only half-heartedly, as by then Islamist politics had polarized the country. Attempts by secular sections, for example, to scrap the blasphemy law, had met with severe resistance. Individuals who wanted the blasphemy law reformed, like Punjab Governor Salman Taseer, have been assassinated, and death threats were issued to Senator Sherry Rahman, who proposed the reform. The Musharraf government, under pressure from the US administration, attempted to control Islamic sections, including the closure of madrasas and stopping patronage to Islamic groups. Instead, he ended up antagonizing the conservative religious right. In fact, he escaped at least 4 assassination attempts. Groups like the Tehreek-e-Taliban emerged, disillusioned with the government and putting up armed resistance in federally administered tribal areas and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan. The country has witnessed armed attacks from the Islamist group alienated by the government, including the attack on the army school in Peshawar in 2014, killing at least 150, of which 134 were students. So, if one views the Kashmir situation in India after the 9/11 attacks, the violence continued in the valley, but there were attempts to normalize relations between India and Pakistan. Under US pressure, which had now turned against Islamists, the Musharraf government restricted funds and logistical support for Kashmiri groups operating out of Pakistan, though not entirely. Pakistan overall has for decades been supported by the US financially, running into billions of dollars. It is widely acknowledged that the funding comes with strings attached. In terms of influence, the US wields over Pakistan and the overall bargaining power when it comes to political help, as we saw during the Soviet Afghan occupation. Without funding and other support from the US, Pakistan would have found itself in an existential crisis. The permanent scarring of Pakistani society and politics, along with deep fault lines within its institutions, have resulted in many today blaming the US for its situation, as we saw in the recent statements of Defense Minister Khwaja Asif and ex-minister Bilawal Bhutto. What they overlook is that Pakistan had no choice, particularly so after its breakup into two in 1971. For nearly a decade, since its defeat in the 1971 war with India and following the Shimla Agreement, Pakistan was unable to work against Indian interests in Kashmir. The period from 1972 to 1989, in fact, was comparatively peaceful, except for riots in 1986. Peace was short lived as 3 years later, in an unrelated development, the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan triggered a chain of geopolitical events in the subcontinent that has ended up, unfortunately, reigniting the Kashmir dispute. Thank you.